COVID-19 pandemic. And in fact, Mr Deputy Speaker, I would say that our government has on record a great delivery of a response to a crisis that many around the world look to with envy. Earlier this year, Australia also faced the deadliest threat of bushfires, and again, emergency powers were also enacted. Both of these crises have highlighted the tension that can arise between the need for governments to act quickly in an emergency and the due processes of our wonderful, vibrant democracy. At the same time, however, we are hopeful to have this legislation in place for our rapidly approaching bushfire season. We are aware of what needs to happen. That is why the government has worked closely with Labor on this legislation to develop a robust and measured process of review for this legislation once it is in action. And I thank the members opposite for their contribution to ensure that we have the best form of legislation that has had to be delivered somewhat at speed, you could say, because we do have the bushfires fast approaching. Mr Deputy Speaker, I am confident that this bill will strike the balance required, that it provides clarity and efficiency while also preserving our necessary democratic safeguards. This bill will not just deal with one type of emergency, it will have an all-hazards approach, whether they are natural or man-made. All disasters defined in the acts that are has an oversight of remain unchanged. Previously, the definition was different in every act. So the definition for triggering it was different in every act. So, for example, the Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act 1999 already has the power to conduct land clearing in an emergency, but it will become automatic on declaration of a national emergency for the purpose of keeping people and property safe. The National Emergency Declaration Bill 2020 will establish a legislative framework for the declaration of a national emergency by the Governor-General on the advice of the Prime Minister. This is in line with the recommendations of the Royal Commission into National Disaster Arrangements. This bill will introduce a consolidated list of the wide range of emergency powers at the Commonwealth's disposal during a national disaster emergency and empower ministers to sidestep the red tape requirements in legislation that they administer. It would also allow the Prime Minister to compel accountable authorities of Commonwealth entities to provide information to assist the government in a national emergency. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, we have had two huge disasters in the last 12 months, and the community expect a rapid and coordinated and integrated response. It's been seeing that in action in the last year, and this will continue to improve those processes. So this bill could, for example, include information about stockpiles, assets and resources, vital for an event such as bushfires. Mr Deputy Speaker, this will provide decision makers with greater clarity as to the range of powers available in a national emergency. At the same time, it will provide greater efficiency, and this will protect lives and livelihoods. Mr Deputy Speaker, the National Emergency Declaration Consequential Amendments Bill 2020 works in tandem with the aforementioned bill to establish a legislative framework for declaring national emergency. It amends various acts and regulations that contain powers which are used during a national emergency. However, the consequence of this is relatively confined and creates only one new power, with the imposition of an obligation on telecommunication providers to help in times of national emergency. This may include, for example, sending emergency message alerts. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, this is merely a reflection of the times. In the past, communities, particularly regional communities in bushfire-affected areas, would rely on our wonderful ABC for important and critical messages via radio. But as we know, so many Australians are now very dependent on their smartphone device, with 91% of Australians having a smartphone device. So it's important that we utilise all mediums when there is a national emergency and ensure that people get out when they need to. I know myself, with family members affected by the Black Saturday fires, with Marysville, the Marysville fires and the terrible loss of life through that tragic period, that people did not respond to the request to leave their property. They stayed to defend and fight it, and there were some tragic outcomes as a result. This bill will streamline existing powers in the case of a national emergency. Amongst a variety of other things, includes amending the Sydney Airport Curfew Act 1995 to enable aircraft during a national emergency to take off from or land at Sydney Airport during a curfew period when being used in connection for an emergency. Obviously, it's not clear sometimes for people that the workings behind a decision for government to act can be curtailed by all sorts of technical aspects, and these smooth sailing approach to cutting red tape to ensure that governments can act efficiently is very important. This bill is firmly centred on ensuring contemporary practice and efficiency during a national emergency so that we can keep people safe. But also it's important to remember that the efficiency of use must not become the efficiency of abuse. We're all keen to avoid the mistakes of the Victorian government during the COVID-19 pandemic, who failed to understand the balance between responding swiftly in a crisis and ensuring accountability when they sought to extend their emergency powers by an extraordinary 18 months. Like a patient in an emergency, doctors must often step in and work swiftly, frequently without clear consent. But when the disease becomes chronic, informed consent cannot be a casualty in decision-making between doctor and patient. Likewise for our democracy, when time is of the essence, our democracy can and should take a momentary backseat. But when time is no longer of the essence, our democratic processes must always be in the driver's seat. We forget this principle at our peril. Mr Deputy Speaker, we have seen the good, the bad and the ugly during national emergencies around the globe this year. I think Australians should feel very confident and very secure in the fact that we have a steady pair of hands at the helm. This bill is about ensuring that Australia's practices are top tier without compromising our democratic foundations. I commend this bill to the House. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
I thank the member for Higgins. I'll state the question in the form that the words proposed to be omitted stand part of the question.